Dr Jodie Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. If you have been a part of this beautiful podcast community for a while, you'll know that I share very openly about my own anxiety and mental health and the challenges that I'm facing, which are many of the challenges that I know you as a listener are facing too. I also love to share what helps me. I love to bring the research to the podcast so that you can learn about what's helping others. And one of the practices that I am leaning on more and more is self-compassion. And on my way to the studio here today, I missed my turn off, and my first thoughts were, to berate myself, like just a moment of, that was a dumb thing to do. And then immediately, and it's because I've been practicing it, I immediately realised, hey, show yourself some compassion here. This happens to everyone, and my sat nav is going to reroute me, and I got to the studio a little later than I'd hoped, but just immediately being able to just show myself a little bit of kindness, it's transformative. And when gorgeous Ro opened the door for me here at the studios, and I said, I missed my turn off. She's like, I've done that so many times. Did you end up going through the tunnel? And we had a laugh, and immediately I knew that I wasn't alone. She was straight away able to share that that's something that she's done as well, and lots of other people here have done the same. So self-compassion and compassion is just a really powerful way to look at life and to practice in towards ourselves and to others. And I really wanted to learn more about it, which is why I have invited today's guest. Because I know when I take a self-compassion break, and if you listened to my episode with Dr Kristen Neff, which was published on the 10th of April 2024, you will know just how transformative a self-compassion break can be. And she talked us through one which was just absolutely beautiful. When I do that for myself, the struggles and the challenges seem to melt away in a way that they wouldn't if I didn't practice that compassion for myself. I feel less distressed, and I move through those times more easily. Even though they're tough, I do move through them more easily than I would otherwise. So it's with absolute pleasure that today I get to talk with another leader in the science, practice and application of compassion. And so joining us today from Queensland, here in this beautiful country of ours, Australia, is Dr Stan Steindl. He's a clinical psychologist in private practice with other colleagues, an adjunct professor at the University of Queensland, co-director of the University of Queensland Compassionate Mind Research Group, author and founder of the YouTube channel Compassion in a T-shirt. So Stan, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast today. I'm really keen to learn from you and to get this conversation started. So welcome and thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jodie. And firstly, look, I'm sorry that you had that kind of rough start. It does sound we can it's a good example, isn't it? Of the little things that can happen, and then we can end up really berating ourselves. So it's impressive that you really have started this practice of self-compassion. And that's what I love about it, really, is that compassion kind of just seems, sometimes we get to the point, I think, where compassion arrives just when we need it most. And that was something of your experience today. I've actually had a morning so far where I've done yoga and some yoga flow, and then I came home for a cup of tea and a banana, and then just wandered into my office at home. So I've had a very different start, I suppose. But anyway, yes, thank you very much for speaking with me. I appreciate all that you do.
Oh, look, thank you. And very, very different morning. And it's so interesting, isn't it, that things can, in light of what you were saying, that things can turn on a dime in life, can't they? And I know that there are a lot of people who, we know everyone struggles. It's human to struggle. And one of the things that I want to ask you in a moment, I want to hear about this compassion in a T-shirt, but I think I just wanted to add to this that the reason I missed my turn off was because I was in deep conversation with a friend about a big problem in my life at the moment that's causing a lot of distress. And so it was no wonder I missed my bloomin' turn off, because I was, seeking help and comfort and advice. And I know all of us, because of the way life is, there's lots of ups and downs. We never know when a challenge is going to come our way. And what I've learned is that if I recognise I don't feel good, I feel uncomfortable, I feel distressed, I feel sad, I feel low, I feel anxious, I have this little inner voice now that says, it's okay to feel this way, you can handle this. And I don't have to handle it by trying to get rid of it. I handle it by, and it's funny, as I'm saying this to you, my hand is on my heart. I handle it by knowing, even when I have to experience the really tough stuff, I have this inner knowing that I'll be okay because I know how to treat myself. That's why I just love the work you're doing. And I do want to start by Compassion in a T-shirt. I have looked at your YouTube channel. I want to know why you named it this. And I want you to start by telling us about this, because this is a place where listeners can get some really great support, insight, teachings. I'm just really curious to know, where the name came from.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's been, Compassion in a T-shirt's been going now for a few years, but I've really tried to kind of ramp it up, I think, this year in particular. Sometimes it's little video essays, I guess, little 10-minute kind of bites about, compassion, the science and practice of compassion. And sometimes it's interviews, sort of a little bit like what you do as well, the sort of interviewing people from around the world, really, that are interested in compassion and disseminating and spreading compassion. But I suppose the inner T-shirt bit, I think the idea there really is that sometimes when you look into the science of compassion, it does get very detailed, quite complex. There's often psychological sciences, but the neurosciences, the wisdom traditions, there's a lot to it, and a lot that one can consider. And so partly it's about trying to sort of make sense out of all of that. I guess it's a channel where I'm trying to take a kind of plain language approach to compassion, the science of compassion, and the practice of compassion as well, because sometimes when people discuss compassion, it can get into sort of quite abstract, almost esoteric sort of layers of thinking and that sort of thing, and just trying to be down to earth about it, practical, trying to translate some of these ideas into things that can be helpful. Because Professor Paul Gilbert, he's probably my hero in the world of compassion, and he was the founder of an approach called compassion-focused therapy. And he sort of might say that compassion is, may I be helpful rather than harmful towards myself and others. And it's trying to really explore that, I think, is what does it mean just to be helpful on a practical basis, things that one might do or say or and so on to try to be helpful to ourselves and towards others as well. One of the things I really appreciated in just you elaborating there on your morning a little bit was the idea that you were speaking with a friend as well. And in compassion-focused therapy, we think about 3 flows of compassion. The first might be compassion for others, which, of course, lots of us do. We're very familiar with that. In fact, people often would think of that first, I think. When they think of compassion, they might think of being compassionate towards others. The second flow, which you've kind of mentioned, is self-compassion, when we might relate to ourselves in that same compassionate way, kind of exploring how to be kind and helpful and so on towards ourselves. But the third flow is, of course, being open to receiving compassion from others. And it's an interesting flow, that one, in a way. It's in some ways, it's the flow that people can find most difficult. Various blocks can arise when we think about the idea of, rather than being the helper, we get to be the one that perhaps is being helped, and it can feel uncomfortable in a way, but often that's a very important part of psychological well-being, I guess, is trying to find ways just to open ourselves up to also receiving compassion and self-compassion and compassion for others and finding the balance. So really that's the driver there, I guess, of compassion in a t-shirt is just trying to make sense out of all of that.
Thank you. It's classic been there and got the t-shirt kind of thing. It's like it's almost like an opportunity to sort of get the cliff notes, if you want, of a very detailed and in-depth science and practice. And yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. I might have done a bit of a high-level summary there, but I get it now. I get it. It makes sense to me now. And it's important. Great. It's important. And I think gone are the days, I mean, not really gone are the days, but in the circles I move in, the way I think and what I teach and yourself as well, we know that life's not a bed of roses. I mean, we know that, and that toxic positivity is indeed unhelpful, to be constantly just telling ourselves that it's all going to be okay, or just think a positive mantra and things like that, that we need to be aware of what we're feeling, be able to notice it, be able to recognize it, be able to experience it, and that to be human is to experience the range of full emotions. And I look at compassion as one of those beautiful kind of, it's like a warm hug to me, like a soft velvety blanket when I'm feeling like I need some support. And what's really special, like you were saying, is that we can be that for others. We can give that to others. We can be on the receiving end. And, from ourselves, I mean, in terms of the second flow you were mentioning, in terms of self-compassion. But I really do think that it is very, very hard, like you were saying, for the third flow, where it's about being open to receiving that compassion from others. It can be the thing that kind of blows us over or knocks us down, can't it? I wonder if listeners can relate to almost sort of holding everything together, and then somebody showing you compassion, and then you fall apart, the tears come, and the armor drops down, and you kind of like experience and express how you're feeling. I mean, that's happened to me on countless occasions. Like, why did you ask me how I'm going? I had it, I'd pulled myself together. And and can you tell us a bit more about how kind of common that is, and why we do find it hard to be on the receiving end, or do kind of drop our bundle, as is an expression my dad would say, if somebody does turn to us and show us that compassion when we've sort of been steeling ourselves to kind of get through?
Yes, you mentioned Dr. Kristen Neff and speaking with her recently in a podcast. I listened to that one. That was a really wonderful conversation. In the mindful self-compassion world, they call that backdraft, don't they? That idea of when we open a door to sort of perhaps when there's a fire, and we open the door and out rushes the flames, the oxygen sort of draws the flames out towards us. And that's a little bit like self-compassion and receiving compassion from others. It's a hard one, because we often will feel those, very painful emotions come rising up. In compassion-focused therapy, we identify that as fears, blocks, and resistances to compassion. And we can have fears, blocks, and resistances across the three flows, actually, that we can sometimes have certain fears about being compassionate towards others. That sense that, what if people take advantage of me, or what if I get exhausted or run out of energy, as people draw on me for my compassion. So there can be fears, blocks, and resistances there. There can be fears, blocks, and resistances around self-compassion as well. The worry that self-compassion is self-indulgent or too much like self-pity. And then, yes, there can definitely be fears, blocks, and resistances about receiving compassion from others as well. The worry that people will see us as weak or soft, or that, in fact, that concern that you mentioned, that if people ask me how I am, then I'll fall apart and I won't be able to stop crying, for example. I've certainly heard that before, that one of the chief fears and blocks there with receiving compassion from others is that I won't be able to stop crying, that it'll be just too much and it'll be overwhelming and that sort of thing. So we think a lot about some key qualities that kind of go along with compassion, I guess. And oddly enough, they go along with each of the three flows, the sort of the wisdom, the strength and courage, and a commitment to being caring and being helpful. And so the wisdom is an interesting one. That's often trying to think, what is it that this person that I'm being compassionate to, or what is it that I myself in this moment really need? What would really be most helpful? Trying to think of the wise action that might help to alleviate that suffering. And that's a tricky one in receiving compassion, actually, because it relies also on the other person's wisdom. One of the things that often has blocked me in receiving compassion is that the way someone might do it might not feel quite right for me. Like I might like something that's kind of a bit more understated and, kind of like, you'll be right, Stan, or something like that. But the other person might be very, very empathic or sympathetic, and that might feel too much or that sort of thing. So that it's sort of wisdom is one thing. Strength and courage is interesting because isn't it funny? We know that it takes courage to be compassionate towards others, but it kind of takes courage to sort of open ourselves up to receiving compassion as well, whether that be from ourselves actually or whether that be from others, and how to find that strength and courage and calmness and composure and groundedness to be able to say, will you help me? That it's sort of kind of profound in a way. And then finally, yes, that commitment to being caring and helpful to others, but also to ourselves. So quite often we start to think, we have these fears, blocks, and resistances, but how can we break compassion down into, firstly, these different qualities, I guess, and start to kind of practice there, developing those qualities within ourselves, just to be that openness to compassion across the three flows.
You've got me thinking about this idea that if I show compassion, you mentioned before this idea that some people, one of the fears or blocks or resistances might be that if I show compassion, I might look soft or weak. But what it got me thinking about was I've been married for a long time, 22 years, Peter. Talking about him
Great.
a lot.
Congratulations.
He knows that he's okay. He's like, say what you want, that's fine. But I'm a naturally very compassionate. I think it's just in my nature. It's more in my nature, and then as the more I've learned about it, I learned about the science of compassion a long time ago when I studied the science of happiness, and it just really sat really comfortably with me. And Peter, he hasn't, he's learned over the years, as you do learn from, the person that you live with and share your life with. He's never been very compassionate because, and we've talked about it and pulled it apart a lot, and it's because he was never really showed a lot of compassion, and it was just sort of like get on with it kind of approach. But also in his mind, he sort of feels though, if I show compassion, then am I going to be able to handle what comes next? And is it opening a door for vulnerability and for emotion that I don't want to open? So there's so many layers to it, aren't there? We have a running thing in the house, and we have a 16-year-old son, and well, it's not quite compassion, it's sort of more empathy, it's related. They'll say, I understand. If somebody says something, that they sort of go, I understand, as if like, I'm getting it. I'm trying to approach this from not a fix-it point of view, and I'm not shutting the door. I understand. And it's a bit of a running joke, but everyone in the house is really learning how everybody appreciates being responded to when something goes wrong. And that's been a bit of a learning curve. But I don't know whether or not listeners, you can relate to that. Everyone's so different. But when you think about compassion and the difference that it makes in people's lives, and compassion-focused therapy is a large part of the work that you do, can you share with listeners more about that? Because there's so many different therapeutic approaches. And so for a listener who is feeling like they might need some support with their mental health, their well-being, around experiences in their life, and they're questioning, I wonder if this could be for me, could you share with us who are the right fit clients? Who does this work for? Who is it beneficial for? Is it a type of therapeutic approach that is supportive for anyone, irrespective of kind of what your challenges are?
Yes, well, you raised a couple of really important points, that compassion is really no one thing, is it? It's very difficult to say, that's a compassionate behavior, and, but that's not, or something like that. It depends, really. It depends on both, I think, the giver and the receiver. So when we're the giver of compassion, we're trying to think about, what it is this other person might need. And when we're the receiver of compassion, we're trying to communicate maybe what it is we might need. And I can sort of hear that in your family, you're doing a lot of that, trying to negotiate around this idea of what the different people might need or might feel helpful when things go wrong. And so there really is a lot of wisdom in there. I mean, probably one of the things I'd start with from a CFT point of view is what is compassion in a way, and kind of just go back to the definition.
Please. I was just sitting here thinking, we are, talking about this word in a really clear definition, because I was sitting here thinking compassion in my mind is seeing a need in someone and feeling motivated to want to do something about it. That's So tell us more, please.
Yeah, no, there's kind of those two processes, isn't there? I think a lot of people can relate to that. In CFT, just as a working definition, we'll often say compassion is a sensitivity to suffering in oneself and others, with a commitment to try to alleviate and prevent that suffering. And there's a lot in there, actually. I mean, it is a sensitivity, as you say. It's about being sensitive and aware and noticing, basically, the suffering. And, we all kind of will walk around in our day and kind of just not notice sometimes the suffering of others, and even the suffering of ourselves. So that's the first little sort of step is sensitivity. It's about suffering. So in a way, compassion is different to kindness, although they're obviously related. They're both very pro-social ideas, and kindness is doing things for the benefit of others. But compassion is really focused on noticing suffering and in ourselves and others. So right in the definition is the bit about self and others. People sometimes feel that they should be compassionate towards others and not the self. I shouldn't prioritize myself, but actually it's in the definition, everyone. So is self and others. And then, like you said too, with a commitment or a motivation to try to alleviate and prevent that suffering. I mean, compassion really is a motivation. It's that motivation to notice suffering and then take helpful action to alleviate the suffering and also prevent it. And actually, Paul Gilbert is really talking more and more about compassion also being about aiding flourishing as well. It's about reducing suffering, but also enhancing flourishing. So that's kind of the definition. And there's a lot in there, actually, from the point of view of, kind of the competencies that we might bring to that motivation. There's the sensitivity piece that you mentioned. But then we also, we think about empathy and sympathy as competencies of compassion. How well can we empathize? How well can we sort of understand the person and their emotional experience and what all this means to them? But also, how well do they feel understood? Your example before of I understand, the bit that misses is really conveying to the other person something that helps them to also feel understood. So empathy, we have the affective empathy, being able to resonate with the person's feelings and emotions. And we have the cognitive empathy, being able to see things from their perspective. And then we find ways to help them really feel understood. So that's the empathy bit. The sympathy bit, and this is a funny one. There's some controversy here sometimes in these conversations, but at least from a CFT point of view, sympathy is really just that basic idea that we feel moved by the person's suffering. We feel touched by it. The empathy is about really connecting with that other person's perhaps feelings in a situation, whereas sympathy is more a feeling of our own, a feeling of concern. We feel moved by that. It's not pity. It's not about pity. It's not something like that, but it's really just sort of feeling moved by what the person's going through. Then the next key bit, and I think Peter, if you're out there, this is sort of the wisdom of what you were thinking about, and that is distress tolerance. We really need to kind of cultivate that competency to be able to manage the difficult feelings that arise in us when we are compassionate. because we're working with suffering, and we're empathizing with suffering, and we're feeling sympathy towards that. So there's a lot of emotions going on for us as well. So developing distress tolerance is often a key. And then really it's doing that non-judgmentally, trying to de-blame and de-shame people for what they're going through and perhaps the suffering that they're experiencing. It's not their fault. It's not our fault. But it is our responsibility. And so that's the final competency there, is kind of like a caring motivation, a care for well-being, and moving into taking steps, taking action, but taking responsibility and finding ways to help managing the suffering in others or in ourselves. And so we have the definition. Compassion is a sensitivity to suffering in self and others with a commitment to try to alleviate and prevent it. And then we have these 6 competencies: sensitivity, empathy, sympathy, distress tolerance, non-judgment, and care for well-being, and learning how to take steps, take helpful action from there. And in terms of your question, suffering is a part of life. It really is. We all have or are or will suffer, sadly, as much as that's a difficult kind of a thing to reflect on. But it's that common humanity piece that we all know something, our own version of what it is to suffer. And so CFT really, I mean, in some ways it really is for everyone, I think. And I would probably say learning ways to kind of notice suffering and to alleviate it. But just one last little point. It was developed in particular to help those who experience self-criticism, especially that really sort of self-attacking, self-hating self-criticism that sadly is there for many of us, and to help manage feelings of anxiety and anger and sadness, but also the really painful feelings of shame and so on. So, it's not really about any particular presentations, but rather it's a kind of a transdiagnostic approach to helping people to find ways to suffer less.
You've got such a lovely way of holding a question in mind and then being able to bring us to an answer with the additional understanding that we need. So thank you for that. And
yeah,
I do want to ask in a moment about the 3 circles model of emotions, particularly how anxiety fits in there. But just before we move on to that, can we please talk about compassion fatigue? Because I know that there will be listeners who can relate to that, whether it's an experience from the pandemic or whether or not it's in their workplaces or in the work that they do or in their own families with loved ones, with children or parents or others that they're caring for. Can you share a little bit with us about compassion fatigue and what someone who's feeling that way might be able to do to have compassion for themselves and also support themselves, because that's a pretty tough place to be?
Yes, it's a very important question. And as you know, there's been lots and lots of research really on the topic of compassion fatigue. And it sort of always, begs the question a bit for me, what is compassion fatigue? And there's a few thoughts I'd have. I mean, one thought is that sometimes for compassion fatigue is a little sign or signal that the 3 flows are out of balance. So that's probably one thought about it, is that if we are spending a lot of time, the compassion is flowing out, and it's flowing out towards others. Maybe that's through our work or even, at home or amongst our friends or family and so on. And compassion is flowing outwards, and there's a less or something of the self-compassion or opening ourselves up to compassion. Then that can absolutely become tiring, exhausting. Sometimes. I remember I did a lecture, I think, to some nursing students some time ago, and I gave them a little questionnaire which assesses those 3 flows of compassion, and it was fascinating that their measures indicated, compassion for others was very, very high, well above the norm. But then their self-compassion and their receiving compassion from others scores were much, much lower than the norm. And I think that's kind of one of the things that's at the heart of it, is we're wanting to stop and kind of just remember the 3 flows and trying to see, can we have balance across those 3 flows? The question of of self-care and self-compassion, especially for health professionals, is a really important one to stop and think about. The second thought, though, too, is that working with suffering, and sometimes for health professionals especially, but for lots of us, when we're trying to help someone, we're actually, this person is having some of the worst days of their life, basically. This is very, very difficult stuff, and we're kind of at the coalface, trying to be there, trying to empathize, trying to connect with that person, and trying to be helpful, and it's tough. It's actually distressing, and sometimes if we become personally distressed by all of that, one of the dangers is fatigue, but the other danger is that we actually feel motivated to move away from that suffering, to move away from compassion, and to move towards something that's more about self-protection and so on. And so if we break down those kind of core competencies of compassion, then we might be thinking, well, actually, my empathy is great, my sympathy is great, I'm very sensitive, I'm being non-judgmental. What I need to work on is distress tolerance. That's the piece that perhaps is kind of an opportunity, really. If I can cultivate various ways to manage that personal distress, so I can stay in a kind of a emotional concern sort of place, and not a personally distressed kind of place. So that's the second thought. And then the third thought is that quite often compassion fatigue is really more along the lines of just burnout and kind of occupational stress.
Yeah.
Burnout can arise when we're very sensitive to suffering, but something in the system or the workplace or how things are happening at the moment kind of prevents us from actually taking helpful action, and because in some ways compassion is a bit of an algorithm like that. There's a stimulus and a response. The stimulus is suffering, and the response is trying to do something helpful or alleviate that suffering. And if the response is blocked somehow, then we've got all that sensitivity to the suffering, but no way to respond, and that can absolutely lead to sort of fatigue or burnout. One of my little things about compassion fatigue, if I may say, is that it's sometimes the idea of compassion fatigue kind of puts the burden of it all back on the health professional or back on the person who is trying to be compassionate. Like you have compassion fatigue, whereas actually quite often we need to stop and look at the system that person's operating in, and we need to sort of think, is that burnout there perhaps due to more organizational or systemic factors as well? Are those people supported to be able to respond to compassion in the way they would really want to? So, balancing the three flows, trying to work on those key competencies there of compassion, especially distress tolerance, but trying not to put all of it on the compassionate person, but rather reflecting a bit on the context, the system that perhaps, could be also supporting them in their compassionate motivation.
And I think any healthcare workers and even teachers, I know there's been a lot of talk in teaching about the moral injury. I don't know if you heard that expression before. Yeah, of just being, if I do understand it correctly, being really unable to do what it is that you'd really love to be able to do, whether or not that's with a particular child, with a class, with a program, and just this idea that there's so much in teaching that takes you away from what kind of drew you there in the first place. And these three flows, I love that you keep reinforcing this idea that we can share compassion with others, we can turn it inwards for ourselves, and we can be open to receiving it. And so I really love that you've been able to highlight that for us. And I do want to follow on just to ask if you can share with us the CFT, the 3 circles model of emotions, especially the threat system, where obviously that brings in anxiety just sort of before we run out of time today.
Yes, no, I do bring it back to the 3 flows because, like I don't know about you, but like sometimes someone might say to me, "You've had a big day, Stan. How are you? Okay with everything?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm fine. But I'm not really fine, like it's a nice one to just to plant that seed for everyone, just that idea that, sometimes we block that. And that's probably the big challenge here, I think, is to open up to the receiving. The three circles model is a sort of a beloved model in CFT, and it's really because a CFT has sort of behind it is the evolutionary theory and the idea that we have these evolved brains really that were designed for us and not by us. They have these various kind of quirks that are built into the brains that were really designed to help us survive, and I suppose survive long enough to reproduce. I mean, that's sort of the heart of evolution, I suppose. And the problem is that evolution isn't so worried about what makes us happy. It's just focused on what helps us to survive. And so the three circles model, really, it's just obviously the brain is more than just three circles, but it's a nice way to think about it and to kind of de-blame and de-shame ourselves for just this idea that in so many ways, the way that our brain operates is not our fault. And the first circle, if you like, is the threat system, which is, and actually many listeners will be familiar with this idea. The threat system, it's really motivated towards threat protection and safety seeking. People will know about the fight-flight response, or the fight-flight freeze appease response, or the fight-flight freeze fawn response. There's various ways that it depends, I think, whether you like rhyming, fight, flight, freeze, appease, or whether you like alliteration, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. But anyway, I suppose the idea really is that these are these four behavioral responses, I guess, that might help us to respond to a threat. And a lot of anger and anxiety, fight, flight, I guess, is in the threat system. And also disgust is in there, which is often important when we stop and think later about things like self-criticism or shame. But we have these threat system, and it's important, and it's kind of great. It's meant to be there. It's kind of been a big part of what's helped our species to survive, and it's probably a very sort of reactive system of the brain. It sort of dominates in a way, and we're walking through the path and we think, oh my God, it's a snake. And then we think, oh no, that's just a stick or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a very, very reactive, because, like we needed to sort of be able to notice and respond to threats very quickly. But we couldn't just hide away all the time. We had to go out and get stuff. And so that's the second circle, the drive system, which is really about pursuing and obtaining and succeeding. Often in amongst the drive system is kind of excitement or pleasure or joy, or that sense of achievement. Finding food, finding a sexual partner, those are the sorts of evolved kind of aspects of the drive system. But we're still, driven in so many ways today. But it's a tricky one as well, because sometimes we have that idea of hedonic adaptation, whereby we're driven to achieve something, but even when we get there, it's never quite enough. And we kind of need the next thing and the next iPhone or the next, kind of whatever it might be. And so there can be a source of suffering in the drive system too, especially when it's coming from a threat-based drive, or things like perfectionism can arise in the drive system. And then the third circle, though, really is that, humans were never overly sort of big and strong and able to fight off all the threats, and nor were we overly quick and able to run away from the threats. But what we had was each other. If we're out with a group, then okay, we can probably shoo off the lion or that sort of thing. But if we're out in the wild alone, then we're dead. And so the soothing system is all about, we sort of call it the soothing affiliative system, because it's all about kind of that sense of belonging and connection and closeness with others. And that when we're in that sort of state, then we feel safe and we feel, calm and composed and content and also able to play and maybe even explore the world. And so in CFT, we try to kind of work towards a really good sense of mind awareness, I guess, is how we think of it. Just sort of being aware of the mind. Which of my 3 circles is activated right now? Ooh, okay, that's my threat system is activated. Anxiety is coming to the fore. What can I do to be helpful? Well, I can do little practices to shift into that soothing affiliative system, down-regulate threat system. And then once I'm there, perhaps then I can move out to drive. Then I can feel calm and confident and ready to explore the world. You might be able to sense there that there's a lot of attachment theory in CFT, that idea of safe haven and secure base. And in some ways, the soothing affiliative system is kind of like a safe haven from threat. But then it also becomes a secure base from which we can go out to explore the world and move into the drive system. And so, it's really about mind awareness and understanding, being able to kind of notice the systems that are activated, especially threat system, and then having certain strategies or approaches to activate the soothing affiliative system and move into, I guess, a compassionate and self-compassionate motivation from there.
Oh, I love the way that you've been able to describe that, and it's just so relatable. And I did say that was my last question, but just very, very briefly, could you please share something that you love to do, like a practice that you love to do, which helps you to really settle down the fight, flight, freeze, fawn system.
Yep.
So settle the threat when it's detected, which we've talked about a lot here on the podcast, or, rather than sort of down-regulating that system, something that sort of more up-regulates the soothing system. So do you just have one short practical idea that you could share with us that listeners could sort of take away, and try themselves?
Yeah, well, the Paul Gilbert, who is the founder of compassion-focused therapy, way back in the 80s, I think. I mean, his real eureka moment was that he realized that, because he was a cognitive behavioral therapist, and he realized that people could change the thoughts that they might be having, but still not necessarily feel any better. So they might have new thoughts that were like, of course people like you, don't be ridiculous, or something like that. And so what he tried to work on was tone, and trying to not only relate to ourselves kind of rationally, but with a tone that's kind of warm, soothing, compassionate, a caring and compassionate tone. And so this is probably one of the things that I work on myself kind of most days. And because I go out to the car in the morning, I'm in a bit of a rush, I've got to get to work, and I arrive at the car and, I've forgotten my keys, sort of thing. And the immediate thing is, you idiot, look at what you've done it again, and then you think to yourself, oh, hang on a moment, let's just soften the tone. Let's just kind of, sometimes you can even say the same thing, but with a compassionate tone, it kind of melts away a little bit, you idiot. It still doesn't sound great, but the idea is to really work with the tone and to work with the body, creating a kind of an upright but relaxed body posture, a warm, friendly facial expression, a slow and soothing breath, and then relating to ourselves with a different tone, a tone of inner voice that is warm and friendly, sort of validating, reassuring, supportive, encouraging. We're still wanting to encourage ourselves to kind of keep going and to sort of do the things that are important to us and so on. So it's definitely not a kind of a giving up tone, but it's not a kind of hypercritical tone. It's this kind of compassionate encouragement to keep going even when things are tricky or tough.
Yes. Thank you very much. I am so grateful to you for the way that you've shared so much about the absolutely wonderful work that you're doing, and you're bringing to us a perspective that includes, your expertise from your clinical practice, from your research, and your podcasting and your teaching, whether you're at the university or on Compassion in a T-shirt on YouTube. And if you could please let us know. I know you're in Brisbane. If you could please let us know how our listeners could contact you, work with you, or get in touch with you.
Yeah, definitely. Our practice is called Psychology Consultants in Brisbane. We have a couple of offices one on the north side and one on the south side. So stan@psychologyconsultants.com.au. People can certainly contact me there. I also have my own website, which is just stansteindl.com. And so there's a whole bunch of links and resources there as well. But I'd be delighted if people would come and have a look on YouTube. Just search my name, Stan Steindl, or Compassion in a T-shirt, and kind of join in the conversation there as well. I really love getting comments and feedback, and people can agree or disagree or have other points of view, because I think we're still really fleshing out this idea of compassion and what it is, and really how to be helpful. So would love to see people on YouTube as well.
Absolutely. We're so lucky, aren't we, we can put a podcast on in the car, we can put a YouTube episode on when we're at home, maybe cooking the dinner or just hanging out or just taking a little bit of a break. And I appreciate that there are lots of ways that people can connect with your work and the work of your colleagues. And of course you have 3 books, and I know that they're on the website as well.
That's right.
So thank you again. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thanks so much, Jody.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. I always appreciate your time. And yes, please let me know how you enjoyed this episode, what your takeaways were. You can catch me at jody@drjodyrichandson.com.au. And of course, via Instagram is a really great way to just send me a DM. I reply to everything. And always interested to know if you have any particular topics that you would like for me to record an episode on as well. I will find a wonderful person to speak to and support you in whatever walk with anxiety you are taking. So thanks again for your time, and I'll be back with a brand new episode again next week. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jody Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodyrichandson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.